Honor is a silver lineage, a thread of courage passed down through generations of warriors who refused to surrender their souls. Witness the epic tales of family, duty, and the final victory of the spirit over time. Subscribe now and start tracing your own path to greatness with us.
Pulled into the driveway on a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be somewhere over the Atlantic. The company had canceled the Frankfurt leg of the trip. Some issue with the client's internal restructuring. They needed to push the audit 3 weeks. My manager called me at O'Hare while I was waiting at the gate, told me to head home, rest up, we'd reschedule. I'd been traveling for 6 weeks straight by that point. 6 weeks of hotel rooms and airport sandwiches and video calls that always seemed to drop right when my daughter was trying to show me something she'd drawn. I'd imagined the moment differently. Maybe Zoe running out when she heard the car. Maybe my wife smiling in the doorway, surprised, happy. The house looked the same as always from the outside. Nancy's car was gone, which made sense. She worked afternoons at the dental office on Tuesdays. But school got out at 3 and it was almost 4. Zoe should have been home. I tried the front door. Unlocked, which was odd. Inside, the kitchen smelled like nothing, which also wasn't right. Zoe always had a snack going after school. Cereal, toast, something. The counter was bare. I checked her room. Her backpack wasn't on the hook behind the door where she always hung it. Her sketchbook wasn't on her desk. She'd been getting into charcoal drawing lately, and she usually had smudges on her hands for 3 days after she worked on something. The desk was clean and empty and organized in a way that didn't look like a 10-year-old's room. I called Nancy. She picked up after 2 rings. "What's wrong?" was how she answered, which was the first thing that felt off. I hadn't said anything yet. "Where's Zoe? She's not home." A small pause. Not long, but I noticed it. "She's at the program, Alan. I told you about it." I tried to remember. 6 weeks of offshore calls on different time zones. Conversations that jumped between project timelines and bedtime routines and Zoe's homework schedule. Details blurred. "What program?" "The leadership retreat. Dr. Whitfield's program. I emailed you about it 2 weeks ago. You said okay." I might have replied without fully reading. That was on me. But something set wrong anyway. Something I couldn't name yet. "Where is it?" "I want to go see her." "Alan, you can't just show up. It's a structured environment. They specifically ask parents not to drop in. It disrupts the dynamic. She's been doing really well." "How do you know she's doing well?" "Dr. Whitfield sends updates. She said Zoe's been engaging beautifully with the curriculum." "What curriculum?" "You said it was a leadership retreat." "Leadership is the curriculum. It's experiential. They do teamwork exercises, service projects, life skills." "Alan, you've been gone for 6 weeks." Zoe needed structure. She was getting difficult. Zoe wasn't difficult. Zoe was quiet and observant and drew elaborate maps of imaginary countries and read chapter books in a single sitting. What Nancy called difficult, I called a kid who knew her own mind. "Give me the address. I don't have it in front of me right now." "Nancy." A long breath. "It's called Meridian Youth Foundation. It's about an hour and a half north, County Route 9, up past Millhaven. There's a sign." "I'm going up there." "You're going to embarrass her. You're going to walk in there and make her feel like you don't trust her, and she's just starting to open up." I'd already stopped listening. I was looking up Meridian Youth Foundation on my phone while she talked. The website was sparse. A logo, a compass rose, and a few paragraphs about leadership development, resilience building, and values-based curriculum. There were no photos of the actual facility. No parent testimonials with last names. A phone number that went to voicemail. I told Nancy I was going. She told me I was overreacting. I backed out of the driveway. The drive north took me through towns that got smaller and further apart. The interstate became state route, became county road. The GPS wanted to recalculate 3 times once I hit gravel. There was no cell signal for the last 8 miles. I almost missed the sign. Hand-painted on wood, staked into the shoulder. Meridian Youth Foundation. 0.4 mi. An arrow pointing down a 2-lane access road lined with poplar trees. The main building was a converted farmhouse, white clapboard, 2 stories, a barn behind it that looked recently renovated. The whole place looked like a summer camp from the outside. Clean, maintained, maybe even pleasant. There were no kids visible anywhere. I parked in the gravel lot and walked toward the front entrance. A young woman at a reception desk inside a small annex looked up when I pushed open the door. "Hi, I'm here to see my daughter, Zoe Pratt." The woman smiled, but her eyes went somewhere else for just a fraction of a second. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need an appointment to see my own child. Our protocol is that we schedule family visits in advance so we can prepare. I'm not here for a scheduled visit. I'm her father, and I want to see her, right now." She picked up a desk phone and murmured something I couldn't hear. We stood there in silence for about 90 seconds before a man came in from the interior hallway. 50s, trim, khakis, a navy polo with the Compass Rose logo embroidered on the chest. Easy smile. Practiced handshake. "Mr. Pratt, I'm Dr. Whitfield. I understand you've just returned from a business trip. Where's my daughter?" "She's in a group session right now. She's doing wonderfully, I have to say. You should be proud. She's one of our most engaged participants. I want to see her." "Of course. Family connection is important to us. But I do want to be transparent about the process. When we interrupt group sessions, it can create dysregulation for the whole cohort. We found that. Take me to my daughter." He held the smile for a beat longer than natural. "Walk with me." He led me through the farmhouse's main corridor, past a dining area, past a room with folding chairs arranged in a circle. I caught a glimpse through a window as we passed. A group of maybe 12 kids sitting cross-legged on the floor, while a woman wrote something on a whiteboard. I tried to see if Zoe was among them. I couldn't tell. Whitfield took me out a back door into the open property behind the barn. That's when I heard them. Not singing, not playing, just the sound of repetitive motion. The scrape and thud of what I'd learn later was manual weeding, a vegetable operation tucked behind a windbreak of hedges that you couldn't see from the parking lot. A field, maybe 2 acres. Neat rows of vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, green beans, and children working the rows. 20-something kids, maybe aged 8 to 15, each with a weeding tool, moving systematically down the lines. A man in a gray shirt stood at the end of the nearest row with a clipboard. I was scanning faces before I'd made any conscious decision to. I found her in the 5th row. My daughter. Wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat, her hair in a ponytail that had come mostly undone. She was bent over the soil, pulling weeds by hand where the hoe couldn't reach. Her shoulders. When Zoe works on something she loves, her shoulders are loose and she leans in. When she's miserable, when she's at the dentist, when she's waiting for a shot, she pulls them up toward her ears like she's trying to disappear. Her shoulders were up near her ears. "That's my daughter," I said. "Yes, Zoe's been a wonderful." I was already walking toward the field. "Mr. Pratt, the session." The man with the clipboard stepped toward me. "Sir, you can't come in here during work rotation." "Work rotation?" I looked at him, then back at the field, then at the clipboard in his hand. "That's what this is?" I called her name. She stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. When she turned around and saw me, her face went through 3 things very fast. Disbelief, then something fragile and hopeful. Then she started crying. She didn't run to me. She looked at the man with the clipboard first, like she was asking permission. That was the thing that broke something open in my chest. I walked into the field. The clipboard man stepped in my path and I moved around him like he was furniture. Zoe took 2 steps and then I was there and she wrapped her arms around my waist and pushed her face into my shirt and shook. She was thin. I noticed it immediately. I'd been gone 6 weeks and she had lost weight in a way that a healthy kid shouldn't lose weight. Daddy. Just that. Just the word over and over while she shook. I held the back of her head and I didn't say anything for a minute. The other kids had stopped working. They were watching us. A few of them looked scared. A couple looked envious. One girl, younger than Zoe, had her hand pressed to her mouth. Whitfield was behind me. "Mr. Pratt, I understand this is emotional, but why is my daughter doing farm labor? This is our service learning component. The children tend a community garden as part of In August Heat, in long sleeves." I looked at the other kids. Some of them had marks on their wrists where the sleeves ended. Sun exposure, or something else. "How long have they been out here today?" "The rotation is 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. It's 4:15. A pause. The afternoon session ran a little long. I looked down at Zoe. Her lips were chapped. Her hands, when I took them in mine, were rough in a way, A 10-year-old's hand shouldn't be. There was soil embedded under her nails that had been there long enough to dry and crack. When did she last eat? Zoe's voice was very small. Lunch. They said dinner's after the evening session. What time is the evening session? She looked toward Whitfield, that same reflex, checking to see if she was allowed to answer. Zoe, look at me. What time is the evening session? 7. Then dinner at 8:30. But if the reflection journal isn't done, dinner gets pushed. I stood up. We're leaving. Whitfield's voice changed. The warmth drained out of it the way water leaves a bathtub, quickly, all at once. Mr. Mersta, Pratt, Zoe's enrolled in a 30-day residential program. Your wife signed a consent and participation agreement. Removing her mid-program would constitute a breach of that agreement and could jeopardize. She's 10 years old. You have her in a field pulling weeds until dark. We have her in a field pulling weeds until dark. We have permits. This is a licensed program. We've been operating for 11 years and we have an outstanding track record. Outstanding with who? He didn't answer that. I picked Zoe up. She was too old for it, probably, but she didn't argue. She just put her arms around my neck and held on and went very quiet. I started walking back toward the farmhouse. 2 men came around the corner of the barn, large, unhurried, like they'd been called and had taken their time getting there. Whitfield spoke behind me. Andrew, please explain to Mr. Pratt that he can't remove a participant without the proper exit documentation. The larger of the 2 men stepped in front of me. Sir, we need to process your daughter's departure through the office. Get out of my way. It's just paperwork. I've never thought of myself as a physical person. I work in finance. I sit at desks and I read spreadsheets and I drink too much coffee. But I'd spent 11 hours in transit and I had my daughter in my arms and she weighed less than she should and her hands were cracked and I could feel her heart beating too fast against my chest. I walked through them. I don't know exactly what happened. There was a hand on my shoulder that I shrugged off. There was a moment where something almost escalated, and then it didn't, and I was through the door and into the farmhouse corridor with Zoe still in my arms. We came out through the front entry into the parking lot. I buckled her into the passenger seat. She'd outgrown the back seat preference, which felt impossibly normal right now, and I was pulling out my phone when I saw how bad the signal still was. 1 bar. I called Nancy anyway. Alan, I was going to call you. I heard you went out there. She's been doing farm work, Nancy. Manual labor, 4 hours a day in the heat. She hasn't eaten since noon. Her hands are... Dr. Whitfield explained that the gardening is therapeutic. It teaches. She looked at the staff to see if she was allowed to answer my questions. My voice came out quieter than I expected, which is what happens when I'm most serious. My daughter looked at a stranger to get permission to talk to her own father. Silence. I didn't know, Nancy said, but something in her tone had shifted too, like she was hearing something for the first time. He said it was. He has all these certifications, the website. Did you visit? Ever? They discouraged it. He said it was. There was a whole packet about attachment patterns and how parental drop-ins. I'm taking her to urgent care. Then I'm calling the police. Alan. I hung up. The urgent care clinic was 40 minutes south. Zoe sat in the seat beside me and looked out the window and didn't say much. I kept glancing at her. She'd stopped crying, but she had that stillness that kids get when they've been crying so long they've run out. Are you okay? She thought about it. I want a grilled cheese. I will get you every grilled cheese in the state of Michigan. She almost smiled. Almost. At the clinic, the nurse practitioner took one look at Zoe's hands and her color and ordered a blood draw and an IV. Mild dehydration, vitamin deficiency consistent with poor nutrition over several weeks, minor lacerations on her palms from plant contact that hadn't been cleaned or dressed. How long was she at this program? The NP asked me quietly while Zoe dozed under a thin hospital blanket. I'm not sure exactly. My wife enrolled her, maybe 3 weeks. 3 weeks and she's presenting like this. She wrote something on her chart, then looked up. Do you want me to document this for a welfare complaint? Yes. And give me everything. I was on the phone with the county sheriff's department when Zoe woke up. She listened to me talking, then said, "Are the other kids going to be okay?" I told her I was working on it. She nodded and looked back at the ceiling. There was a boy named Timothy. He cried the first 2 days, and they put him in the quiet room, and he came out different, like a key in a lock that got turned the wrong way. I told the deputy to send someone to County Route 9. 2 cruisers went up that evening. A third followed when the deputy saw the facility layout and called for backup. Child Protective Services was there by 9 o'clock. What they found took most of the night to fully document. 24 children, ages 8 to 15, enrolled in a 30-day leadership and resilience program that cost families between $3,000 and $6,000. The program had 2 distinct tracks, a visible one described on the website, full of leadership circles and reflection journals, and an actual one, which involved 4 to 6 hours of daily agricultural labor on a vegetable operation that sold produce to 3 regional restaurants and a farmer's market. The children were not told the produce was sold. They were told it was community service. Their meals were contingent on completing the reflection journals. Kids who asked too many questions or cried or tried to call home were put in the reflection room, which was a converted storage space with no window and no phone access. Zoe had been in it once, on her 5th day, for asking when she could call me. Dr. Whitfield, whose actual name was Bernard Teague, and whose doctorate was from an unaccredited online institution, was arrested at the property. He maintained until the handcuffs were on that he was operating a legitimate educational program, that the families had signed agreements, that the labor was therapeutic and voluntary. His staff attorney, who arrived 40 minutes after the arrest, was more strategic about it. She said very little. Nancy was not arrested, but she was interviewed twice. It turned out she'd heard about the program through her coworker, who'd heard about it through her church. Teague had cultivated a referral network through a handful of churches and school counselors in 3 counties. He offered finder's fees, gift cards, usually $200 per enrolled child. Nancy had received one. She hadn't understood what it was at the time, she told investigators. Or maybe she had, and told herself a story about it that let her sleep. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I understood it in a way I didn't want to understand it. I'd been gone. She was raising a kid mostly alone, and she was tired, and someone handed her a glossy brochure with a compass logo and told her this would help, and she wanted to believe it. I'd wanted to believe our arrangement was working, so I hadn't asked enough questions either. That's the thing they don't tell you about situations like this. The people who look away aren't always cruel. Sometimes they're just exhausted and desperate, and someone offered them a story that was easier than the truth. The trial was 11 months. I quit my traveling position in the first week after finding Zoe, took a regional role that kept me within driving distance. We moved to a smaller house in town, just the 2 of us. Teague got 31 years. 3 of his staff got sentences between 7 and 18 years. 2 others took plea deals. The restaurants that had bought the produce, 2 of them claimed they hadn't known where it came from. One of them had asked once, and hadn't asked again when the answer was vague. That investigation went on separately. The 23 other children went home to their families. 2 of them required inpatient care for malnutrition. A boy named Timothy. I didn't know if he was the Timothy Zoe had mentioned, but the name caught me, was 11 years old, and had lost 9 pounds. Zoe started therapy twice a week with a woman named Dr. Enright, who had a small office above a bookstore and kept a diffuser running and never rushed her. For the first month, Zoe wouldn't do her charcoal drawings. She said her hands hurt. They'd healed by then, physically, but she didn't reach for the sketchbook. One Saturday morning, about 6 weeks in, I came downstairs and she was sitting at the kitchen table with her charcoal set spread out around her and a large piece of paper on a clipboard, and she was drawing. Not a map this time. She was drawing hands, just hands, in different positions, open, closed, reaching. Some of them had marks on them. Some of them didn't. I made coffee and didn't say anything for a while. Dr. Enright says drawing the hard stuff makes it smaller, Zoe said without looking up. Does it? Kind of. It's still there, but it's in the picture now instead of just in me. She kept drawing. I sat across from her and drank my coffee and watched the charcoal move. A year after the trial, a nonprofit that worked with trafficking survivors asked Zoe if she'd be willing to speak at their annual fundraiser. Not about the details, just about healing, about what helped, about what she wanted other kids to know. She was 12 by then. She thought about it for a week, then said yes. She wrote her own remarks. She stood at a podium in a church hall with about 80 people watching, and she spoke for 4 minutes. I was in the third row, and I was holding it together up until the moment she said, "I want other kids to know that being tricked doesn't mean you're stupid. Smart people get tricked all the time. What matters is that someone came for me when they figured it out. That's the thing that matters most, that they came." 80 people cried. I know because I looked up and counted the ones who weren't. Afterward, one of the parents whose son had also been enrolled in Teague's program came over to me. His boy was standing next to him, lanky, 13, pretending to study the catering table. The father shook my hand and held it for a moment. "You made the call that night," he said. "I just took her to urgent care." "No, you called the sheriffs. That's what got the others out. My son was on his 26th day. If they'd finished the program." He stopped, looked over at his kid. Anyway, there wasn't a good response to that, so I just nodded. I thought about the girl with her hand over her mouth, watching me carry Zoe out of the field. I'd given her description to investigators, and they'd identified her. She was one of the 23, home with her family now. I'd never met her parents. I hoped someone had held her like that. Timothy, Zoe's Timothy, as it turned out, recovered slowly. He and Zoe started texting after the trial. She told me about it like it was unremarkable, the way 12-year-olds tell you about things that are actually enormous. "Timothy learned guitar," she said one night at dinner. "He says it helps. Because you have to concentrate on where to put your fingers so you can't think about the other stuff at the same time." "That's a good idea," I said. "He's still pretty sad a lot." She pushed her food around. "I don't know how to help him." "You're already helping him," I said. "You're talking to him. That's the whole thing." She thought about that. The investigation eventually uncovered 2 other operations connected to Teague's network. One in Ohio, one in Indiana. Different models, same logic. Find families in some kind of distress, offer structured help, get them to sign something before they understood what they'd signed. Hundreds of families, investigators said. The Ohio operation had been running for 9 years. I started volunteering with the same nonprofit that had hosted Zoe's speaking event. We did parent information sessions. I wasn't a trained social worker or a law enforcement officer. I just showed up and told my story and answered questions. The questions were mostly the same. How do I know if a program is legitimate? What are the warning signs? I always said the same things. If a program asks you not to visit unannounced, that's a problem. If your child can't call you freely at any time, that's a problem. If your child can't call you freely at any time, that's a problem. If the intake paperwork transfers any kind of decision-making authority to the organization, read every word before you sign and then have someone else read it too. If the staff is evasive about the daily schedule, that's a problem. Legitimate programs, good ones, the ones that actually help kids, welcome parent involvement. They want you involved. They're not threatened by your questions. Someone in the audience always asked, "But how do I know which ones are good?" And I always said, ask the questions anyway. Ask them of the good ones too, because the good ones will answer and the bad ones will tell you that the questions themselves are the problem. 3 years after we left that farm, Zoe and I drove back up County Route 9 on the Saturday in October. I wasn't sure exactly why. It was her idea, actually. She'd been asking about it for a few months. Not in a distressed way, more like she needed to close a loop. The farmhouse was gone. Torn down after the property was seized. The land had been bought by a family who ran a small apple orchard. The trees were heavy and low in October, and when we pulled off the road and looked across the field, it was all red and gold instead of the flat green rose I remembered. Zoe stood at the fence line for a minute without saying anything. "Better?" I asked. "Yeah." She looked at the trees. I kept thinking it would feel bigger. When I thought about it, I mean. In my head it's still huge, but it's just a field. It was always just a field. The bad part was the people. She nodded. I know, I just needed to see it without them in it. She was quiet for another moment. "Timothy wants to come next time. Is that okay?" "Of course." We drove home through the October colors, Zoe with her feet up on the dash and her headphones half on, which meant she was listening to music but still wanted to be able to hear if I said something. That's her version of companionable silence. I've learned to recognize it. A few miles out from home, she pulled one side of the headphones off. "Dad, yeah. I've been thinking about something." "What?" "When I was in that field and you called my name, before I turned around, For like 1 second, I thought I imagined it, because I'd imagined it before and it was never real. And then I turned around and it was actually you. She paused. I don't think I'll ever forget that. That 1 second. I kept my eyes on the road. I won't either, I said. She put the headphone back on. I drove. The light was going orange and low across the fields, and the whole drive home felt like something I wanted to hold on to. Not because it was happy exactly, but because it was ours. Just ours. The normal, quiet, unremarkable life that I'd almost taken for granted before I understood what it meant to almost lose it. I thought about all the other parents still out there, scrolling through websites with compass logos, reading brochures that promised structure and resilience and growth. I thought about how I'd been one of them, not the parent who signed the forms, but the one who was too far away to ask the right questions. How close that is. How easy. The experts said there were thousands of these operations. Not all of them were as organized as Teague's. Some were messier, some were worse. But they all found the same door, a family under pressure, a parent who was struggling, and someone willing to stand in the gap and offer a solution and hand you a pen. The only real protection was stubbornness, the willingness to ask questions that felt rude, to push back on people who presented themselves as authorities, to trust the thing in your stomach that said something was wrong even before your brain could explain why. Because I'd felt it, standing in my empty kitchen, looking at Zoe's too organized desk, talking to Nancy on the phone while she paused just a beat too long. I'd felt it, and I'd gotten in the truck. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. I've thought a lot about the chain of events that led to that afternoon on County Route 9. Not the dramatic part, not the field or the confrontation or the handcuffs. The quiet part before all of that. The emails I skimmed, the calls I let go to voicemail because I was exhausted and the time zones didn't line up. The months I spent telling myself that the arrangement was working because I needed it to be working. That's the part that stays with me, not what Teague did. What I allowed to go unexamined because examining it was inconvenient. There's a version of this story where I never come home early, where the Frankfurt client doesn't restructure, where my flight doesn't get canceled, where I finish the rotation and fly back on schedule and Zoe completes the 30 days and comes home quieter and thinner, and I spend years wondering what changed in her. That version exists. It was 2 weeks away from being real. I got lucky in a way that has nothing to do with anything I did right. But here's what I've come to believe. 3 years out, luck is not a strategy. And the thing that saved Zoe wasn't the canceled flight. It was what I did with the 2 hours after I got home. I could have waited. I could have told myself Nancy had it handled. I could have believed the smooth voice on the phone that said everything was fine and disruption would only hurt her. I almost did all of those things. I almost talked myself out of getting in the truck. What stopped me was a 10-year-old's desk that was too clean. That's all it was. A detail that didn't fit. A small wrong note in an otherwise ordinary scene. And instead of explaining it away, I let it bother me. I let the discomfort exist long enough to act on it. I think that's what intelligence actually looks like in practice. Not the ability to solve complex problems, but the willingness to sit with the feeling that says something is off, even when you can't yet prove it, even when the easier path is to dismiss it. Teague was counting on parents to dismiss it. His entire operation was built on the assumption that exhausted people, overwhelmed people, people who wanted to trust the authority figure in the room would hand over the benefit of the doubt. Most of the time, he was right. The parents who signed those forms weren't bad parents. They were people under pressure who found someone offering relief, and they took it. I understand that more than I'm comfortable admitting. The difference between them and me was not virtue. It was a canceled flight. What I try to pass on now, in the parent sessions, in the conversations I have with other fathers who are traveling too much and sleeping too little, is this: the moment something feels wrong, treat that feeling like information, not proof, not an emergency, just information that deserves your attention. Ask the question that feels rude. Push back on the person who tells you that asking is the problem. Because the people who have nothing to hide don't flinch at questions. They answer them and then they ask you if you have more. Zoe is 12 now. She draws hands in charcoal and texts Timothy about guitar chords and stands at podiums and tells 80 strangers that being tricked doesn't mean you're stupid. She's teaching herself things about resilience that I couldn't have taught her deliberately in 100 years of trying. That's not because of what happened to her. It's because of who she already was and who she kept being, through something that tried very hard to make her into something smaller. I carried her out of that field, but she's the one who walked back into the world.